Let me tell you something, kid. When your own son sends you a message that says, "Get out, old man. My wife can't stand you," you expect your heart to break. Mine didn't. I smiled. And that smile is the reason they were homeless by sunrise. Now don't rush me. Stories like this need to breathe. They need to unfold slow, like the way dust settles in a quiet house after the door's been slammed too hard. It was a Tuesday evening. Early fall. The kind of evening where the air smells faintly like dry leaves and someone's distant barbecue. I was sitting at my kitchen table, same oak table your grandmother and I bought in '78 from a closing hardware store in Cedar Ridge. Still solid. Still level. Unlike most of the people in my life. The house was quiet. Too quiet. After my wife passed, quiet became a permanent roommate. You'd be surprised how loud silence can get when there's no one left to share it with. My phone buzzed. I don't get many texts. Most folks my age still call. So when I saw my son's name, Daniel, flash on the screen, I figured it was about the garage. See, Daniel and his wife, Marissa, had been staying in my rental property for the last 8 months. Not because they had to. Because it was convenient. They'd told everyone it was temporary while they got back on their feet. Truth was, they'd never learned how to stand in the first place. I'd handed Daniel that duplex 3 years earlier. Signed it over cheap. Practically gifted it. Told him it was time he started building something of his own. He sold it within 6 months. Said the maintenance was too stressful. So when they hit a rough patch, which somehow always involved expensive dinners and upgraded SUVs, I let them move into my other property rent-free. I told myself it was temporary. Fathers tell themselves a lot of things. The phone buzzed again. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, picked it up. There it was. "Get out, old man. My wife can't stand you." That was it. No explanation. No build-up. Just that. I read it twice. Then a third time. You know what I felt? Not anger. Not hurt. Clarity. Because that message didn't come from nowhere. It had been brewing for years, like cheap coffee left too long on a burner. Bitter. Burned. Marissa never liked me. She smiled the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. Always polite. Always controlled. She'd sit at my dinner table and compliment the food like she was reviewing a restaurant she didn't plan to revisit. She hated that Daniel listened to me about money. She hated that I owned property. She hated that I didn't apologize for surviving long enough to accumulate something. And most of all, she hated that Daniel still respected me. Or at least, she used to. I set the phone down slowly. Across from me, on the wall, hung a framed photograph of Daniel at 8 years old. Little League uniform 2 sizes too big. Dirt on his knees. Missing front tooth. I coached that team. Never missed a practice. Never missed a game. Back then, he'd run to me after every hit like I'd personally lifted the bat for him. Funny how time rearranges loyalty. I stood up, poured myself a glass of water. No shaking hands. No trembling lip. Just a steady pulse behind my ribs. I wasn't surprised. See, the week before, I'd stopped by their place unannounced. Not to snoop. Just to drop off a box of old tools Daniel had left in my shed. Marissa answered the door. Her face fell the second she saw me. "Oh," she'd said. Just that. Oh. Inside, the house looked different. New furniture. Big television. Expensive artwork. Rent-free living can really boost your decorating budget. Daniel came down the stairs adjusting his watch, some flashy thing I knew he hadn't paid for outright. We talked. It was polite. But tight. Marissa kept glancing at him like she was waiting for something. Later, as I was leaving, I overheard her in the kitchen. She didn't know I was still on the porch. "He makes me uncomfortable," she whispered. Uncomfortable. I'd fought 2 jobs at once to keep Daniel clothed and fed after his mother left. I'd worked overtime through pneumonia once because rent didn't care about your lungs. Uncomfortable. That word stuck with me. Now here it was, crystallized into a text message. "Get out, old man." I sat back down at the table and let the quiet settle again. You have to understand something about me. I don't argue when the decision's already been made. And that message? That was a decision. They weren't asking me to visit less. They weren't setting boundaries. They were erasing me. I reached into the drawer beside the sink and pulled out a thin folder. Beige. Edges worn. Inside were documents. Property deeds. Bank statements. Co-signed loan agreements. See, when Daniel and Marissa moved in, I hadn't just handed them keys. I'd structured everything legally. Temporary occupancy. Utilities in my name. Insurance under my coverage. They thought they were living independently. They were tenants. Tenants who hadn't paid a dime. And I still held the master switch. I stared at the papers for a long while. Not with revenge in my heart. Just, arithmetic. They'd forgotten something about me. I build things slowly. And I dismantle them the same way. I picked up my phone again. Not to respond to Daniel. No. I called my attorney. Old friend of mine. Hank Wilson. We'd played poker together back when our hair was darker and our backs didn't ache at sunrise. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Joe, what's wrong?" "Nothing," I said. "Just need to activate a clause." He didn't ask questions. Good lawyers don't when they know the tone. We talked for 12 minutes. When I hung up, the sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the kitchen floorboards. I finally typed a reply to Daniel. Only 4 words. Understood. Take care. That was it. No pleading. No lecture. No wounded pride. Because pride wasn't what was at stake anymore. Respect was. And once respect leaves a house, it takes warmth with it. I slept well that night. That's the part people never believe. But it's true. I slept like a man who'd finally stopped carrying weight that wasn't his. The next morning, at exactly 8:15 a.m., certain automatic processes began. Paperwork filed. Accounts frozen. Insurance withdrawn. Temporary occupancy revoked due to breach of agreement. Nothing illegal. Nothing dramatic. Just consequences. By noon, the locks were scheduled to be changed. By 2, the utilities were no longer in my name. By 5, the property management company, the one Daniel thought was just a formality, had issued formal notice. And me? I was already gone. Packed what little I needed from my own house and drove north to a small cabin I'd bought years ago but never used much. Paid in full. Quiet place. Pine trees. Clean air. No forwarding address left behind. No dramatic goodbye. Just absence. Around 9:40 that evening, my phone started ringing. I didn't answer. Then came the texts. First confusion. Then panic. Then anger. They hadn't read the agreement carefully when they signed it. They'd trusted that I would never enforce it. That was their mistake. Because love doesn't cancel contracts. And kindness isn't the same thing as weakness. I turned my phone off around midnight. Sat on the porch of that cabin and listened to the wind move through the trees. You'd think I'd feel victorious. I didn't. I felt finished. There's a difference. When someone tells you to get out, sometimes the smartest thing you can do is leave so completely they realize the house was never theirs to begin with. But that wasn't the end. Not even close. Because the next day, Daniel showed up at the cabin. And the look on his face told me he'd finally understood something about his old man. That's where we'll pause for tonight. Here's the thing, kid. When people mistake patience for powerlessness, they gamble with something they don't understand. And sometimes the quietest smile is the loudest warning they'll ever get. You ever see a man realize he's not in control anymore? It's subtle at first. His shoulders sit a little lower. His jaw works like he's chewing words he can't swallow. His eyes keep scanning for exits that aren't there. That's how Daniel looked standing in front of my cabin. It was mid-morning. Cold, thin sunlight slipping through pine branches. I was splitting kindling when I heard tires crunching up the gravel path. I didn't rush. Didn't hurry to greet him like I used to when he'd visit with a six-pack and apologies tucked behind his smile. I finished the swing of the axe. Wood cracked clean. Then I looked up. He stepped out of his car too fast, door left hanging open. That alone told me everything. Daniel was never careless with cars. He loved cars more than common sense. His hair wasn't combed. Shirt wrinkled. Eyes red, not from tears. From stress. "Dad," he said. Just that. No hello. No apology. Just Dad, like the word itself was supposed to fix something. I leaned the axe against the stump. "Morning." He walked closer, hands on his hips. The way men stand when they're trying to look bigger than they feel. "What did you do?" "Straight to it." I liked that. "I enforced an agreement," I said. His mouth tightened. "You had us evicted. Temporary occupancy revoked." "That's eviction." "Depends on who's reading the paperwork." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing now. Gravel crunching under his boots. "Marissa's freaking out. The locks were changed. Utilities shut off. The management company says we're in breach of contract." "What breach?" "We didn't do anything." I let that sit in the air between us. Didn't rush to answer. Sometimes silence is a better teacher than shouting. "You told me to get out," I said finally. He blinked. "What?" "You told me to get out. Said your wife can't stand me." "That was just." He stopped. "Just what?" He couldn't finish the sentence. I watched him struggle with it. Watched the realization creep in. Words have weight. Especially when you send them. You don't get to erase someone and still live under their roof, I said quietly. His nostrils flared. Pride fighting logic. "Dad, it was a stupid argument. Marissa was upset. You know how she gets." "Yes," I said. "I do." He stepped closer, lowering his voice like he was negotiating a business deal. "Look. Let's just fix this. We'll talk to the management company. I'll send you something for rent. We'll figure it out. Send me something. After 8 months." I studied his face. The same jawline he had at 17 when he swore he didn't need my help with college applications. The same stubborn crease in his forehead. But behind it now, fear. "Daniel," I said, "you don't send respect after you've spent it." His expression hardened. "So that's it? You're just going to leave us stranded?" Stranded. Funny word. Like I'd pushed them off a boat they'd built themselves. "You have 2 cars," I said. "You both work. You've had 8 months rent-free to save money." He didn't answer. Because he hadn't saved it. I knew that without asking. Lifestyle eats savings when discipline's not invited to dinner. He kicked at the gravel. "This is insane." "Over a text." "No," I said. Over years. That hit him. He looked up at me differently then. Not like I was an obstacle. Like I was something he didn't fully understand anymore. You're being dramatic, he muttered. No, I said again. I'm being done. Wind moved through the trees behind us. Cabin quiet. No neighbors close enough to eavesdrop. He glanced toward the porch. You're really just going to sit out here while we scramble to find a place? Yes. The simplicity of it unsettled him. Daniel was used to convincing me. Used to emotional leverage. Used to my soft spots. But something in me had calcified. You could have at least talked to me first. I tried, I said. For years. He looked away. That one landed. There were dinners I'd paid for where Marissa corrected how I held my fork. Conversations where Daniel rolled his eyes when I talked about investments. Family gatherings where I was treated like a relic, useful, but outdated. You don't notice erosion while it's happening. You only see it when the cliff finally breaks. He exhaled sharply. Marissa says you've always hated her. I almost smiled. No, I said. I just never trusted her. Why? Because she sees relationships as transactions. He stiffened. And you don't? No, I said. I see them as responsibility. That shut him up. We stood there for a long minute. He shifted his weight, then tried a different angle. Dad, we can't afford first and last month's rent right now. There it was. The truth, finally unwrapped. I folded my arms. You should have thought of that before you decided I wasn't welcome. His jaw tightened again, but the fight was fading. You're going to regret this, he said quietly. That one almost made me laugh. Regret. You know what regret feels like. It's sending a message you can't take back. It's realizing the man you dismissed was the foundation under your feet. I already did, I said. For too long. He looked at me then, really looked. And for a split second, I saw the boy again. The one who scraped his knees and asked if he could sleep in my bed during thunderstorms. But adulthood hardens people. And pride keeps them from kneeling when they should. He nodded once. Short. Sharp. Fine. He turned, walked back toward his car. Door still open. Engine still idling. He paused before getting in. If something happens to us because of this. He didn't finish. Didn't need to. I held his gaze. You're not children, Daniel. He got in the car. This time he shut the door. Hard. Gravel sprayed as he reversed too fast. Then he was gone. The sound of his engine faded into the trees. I stood there a while longer. Heart steady. Hands calm. Not triumphant. Not broken. Just, resolved. Inside the cabin, I made coffee. Sat by the small window overlooking the tree line. My phone buzzed once on the counter. Marissa. I let it ring. Then another message came through. You've destroyed your relationship with your son. I read it once. Then turned the phone face down. No reply. Because some people believe love means permanent access. It doesn't. It means mutual respect. And when that disappears, sometimes the only thing left to do is step back far enough for them to feel the cold. Now listen carefully. This wasn't revenge. It was correction. They thought I was part of the scenery. Permanent. Unmovable. But the thing about foundations? When you pull them out quietly, everything above starts to shake. And Daniel hadn't even seen the rest of the consequences yet. We'll get there. But remember this, kid. Never tell someone to leave if you're standing on something they built. Sometimes they'll listen. And when they do, you might not recognize the ground beneath you anymore. It didn't take long. 2 days. That's how long pride lasts when it doesn't have a credit limit. The first night after Daniel came to the cabin, I kept my phone off. Sat by the fireplace, listened to the wind press against the logs. Slept without dreaming. By the second afternoon, I turned the phone back on. 34 missed calls. Most from Daniel. 8 from Marissa. 1 from a number I didn't recognize, probably a landlord. I didn't return any of them. Instead, I drove into town for groceries. Took my time. Bought fresh bread. Real butter. Steak. Funny how appetite comes back when tension leaves your house. When I pulled back into the cabin driveway, Daniel's car was there again. This time Marissa was with him. She stood beside the passenger door like she didn't want to step onto the gravel. Coat buttoned too tight. Sunglasses on, even though the sky was gray. Daniel looked smaller than before. I got out slowly, grocery bag in hand. Marissa spoke first. You've made your point. No greeting. No apology. Just accusation wrapped in irritation. I set the groceries on the porch railing. I wasn't trying to make a point. Daniel stepped forward. We can't find a place without proof of income history. The management company flagged the lease termination. It's hurting our applications. There it was. Paper trails. Consequences ripple farther than emotions. Marissa pulled off her sunglasses. Her eyes were sharp, but underneath. Panic. We'll pay you back, she said quickly. We just need a few weeks. I looked at her carefully. First time she'd ever offered repayment. Pay me back what? I asked. She hesitated. Because she didn't know the number. Daniel did. His face gave it away. 8 months of rent. Utilities. Insurance. Maintenance. It wasn't small. He swallowed. We don't have that kind of money right now. I nodded. I know. Silence stretched. Wind moved through the trees again. Marissa crossed her arms. Defensive. Cold. You're enjoying this. No, I said. I'm enduring it. Daniel ran a hand down his face. Exhaustion had replaced anger. We're staying in a motel, he said quietly. The cheap one off Route 6. That hit harder than I expected. Not because I regretted anything. But because reality always sounds different when spoken aloud. Marissa glanced at him, irritated he'd said it. I exhaled slowly. You told me to get out, I reminded them. So I did. From your lives. From your safety net. Daniel looked up at me then. Not defensive. Not arrogant. Just tired. What do you want from us? He asked. Finally. Not what are you going to give us? What do you want? I stepped closer. Respect, I said. Marissa scoffed softly. This is about ego. No, I said. This is about memory. They frowned. You both forgot who built the ground you were standing on. You forgot who kept stepping in when things got tight. You forgot that access to me was a privilege, not a guarantee. Marissa's jaw tightened. Daniel's eyes dropped. He knew. I let the silence sit. Then I did something they didn't expect. I'm not reopening the house, I said calmly. But I'll loan you enough for first and last month's rent. Marissa's head snapped up. Daniel blinked. A loan, I repeated. With terms. Written. Signed. Paid back monthly. Marissa started to protest, pride rising again, but Daniel put a hand on her arm. He looked at me carefully. You'd still help us? I'll help you stand, I said. I won't carry you. That difference matters. Marissa studied me like she was trying to find the trap. There wasn't one. Just structure. Daniel nodded slowly. Okay, he said. Not enthusiastic. Not grateful. But humbled. That was enough for now. They left shortly after. No hugs. No soft reconciliation. Just an understanding. As their car disappeared down the road, I stood there thinking about how quickly comfort turns to crisis when it isn't earned. Later that night, I sat by the fire again. Quiet cabin. No buzzing phone. No guilt gnawing at my ribs. Just a steady awareness. I didn't ruin them. I removed myself. And in that absence, they saw how much space I'd been filling. Here's the thing, kid. If you keep saving people from the consequences of their choices, they'll start believing consequences don't exist. Sometimes love isn't stepping in. It's stepping back far enough for them to learn how to walk without leaning. The paperwork meeting happened 3 days later. Not at my cabin. At the bank. Neutral ground. Daniel showed up 10 minutes early. That told me everything about how serious the situation had become. He used to stroll into things like time owed him a favor. Marissa came exactly on time. No earlier. No later. Coat pressed. Hair perfect. Face tight. We sat across from each other in one of those small glass offices that smell like carpet cleaner and old coffee. I had already spoken to the loan officer. Terms printed. Interest modest. Repayment automatic withdrawal. No emotional wiggle room. Daniel read the papers slowly. Lips moving slightly, habit from when he was a kid sounding out difficult words. Marissa didn't read them. She scanned for leverage. There's interest, she said. Yes, I replied. It's family. Yes. She leaned back. You're charging your own son interest. I'm teaching my son value. Daniel didn't look up, but I saw his jaw flex. He knew I wasn't wrong. That's the thing about hard lessons, they sting because they're accurate. When he finished reading, he set the pages down carefully. We'll sign, he said. Marissa opened her mouth again, but he shook his head slightly. That small gesture, that was new. For the first time in years, he chose his spine over her tone. They signed. Ink on paper. No drama. Just consequence formalized. As we stood to leave, Daniel hesitated. Dad, he said quietly. I waited. He swallowed. I shouldn't have sent that text. There it was. Small. Simple. Late, but real. Marissa didn't echo it. She just adjusted her purse strap. I looked at him for a long moment. I know, I said. And I meant it. I didn't need a speech. I didn't need tears. I needed acknowledgement. We walked out into the parking lot together. Cold wind. Gray sky. Daniel stopped by his car. We found a place, he said. Small apartment. Not great. But it's something. Good, I said. He looked like he wanted to say more. Maybe about pride. Maybe about regret. But growth doesn't happen in grand speeches. It happens in quiet shifts. They drove away. And for the first time since that message, I felt something lighter in my chest. Not because they were struggling. Because they were standing. On their own. That evening I sat on the porch again. Watched dusk settle over the trees. There's a difference between punishing someone and letting them feel the weight of their own choices. I didn't throw them into the storm. I just stopped holding the umbrella. And sometimes, kid. That's the only way a grown man learns how to build his own roof. The first payment hit my account on the 1st of the month. Right on time. I noticed it because I always check my balances before coffee. Old habit. Keeps a man honest with himself. The amount wasn't large. Just what we agreed on. But it carried weight. Responsibility always does. I didn't call to thank him. Didn't text to acknowledge it. The agreement was clear. The respect was in the action, not the applause. A week later, Daniel stopped by the cabin alone. No Marissa. That told me even more. He looked thinner. Not unhealthy, just sharper around the edges. Like comfort had been sanded off him. We sat on the porch. No fire this time. Just late afternoon sun and the smell of pine. How's the apartment? I asked. He shrugged. Small. Walls are thin. Upstairs neighbor argues a lot. I nodded. You'll sleep lighter. He gave a faint smile. We sold the second car, he said after a moment. Didn't need to. That one surprised me. Daniel loved that car. What about Marissa? I asked. He hesitated. She's adjusting. Adjusting. That's a polite word for reality pressing in. He looked out at the trees for a long time before speaking again. I didn't realize how much you were covering, he said quietly. Not just money. Other stuff. I waited. He exhaled slowly. I never had to think about worst-case scenarios. You always handled them. There it was. The safety net he didn't see until it was gone. I won't always be around, I said. That sentence landed heavy between us. He shifted in his chair. I know. Silence settled again. But it wasn't hostile. It was reflective. You and Mom, he said suddenly, did you ever struggle like this? I almost laughed. Worse, I said. And I told him, not dramatically, not bitter, about the nights I worked doubles. About peanut butter dinners. About the year the transmission died and I rode a borrowed bicycle to work in winter. He listened differently now. Not as a son half distracted. As a man collecting tools. When I finished, he rubbed his hands together. I thought comfort was normal, he admitted. No, I said gently. Comfort is earned. And maintained. He nodded slowly. Before he left, he stood awkwardly by his car. Dad, he said. I looked up. I'm trying. 3 simple words. I saw it in his eyes, he meant them. That's all I ever wanted, I replied. He drove off without slamming the door this time. Later that night, I sat alone again. The forest quiet. The fire low. I thought about how easy it is for parents to confuse rescue with love. For years, I'd stepped in before Daniel ever felt the full weight of his decisions. This time, I stepped aside. And instead of breaking him, it was shaping him. Here's something you learn late in life, kid. If you cushion every fall, your children never learn how to land. And landing, even hard, is what teaches balance. 3 months passed. 3 payments. All on time. Not early. Not late. On time. You'd be surprised how much a man can say without words just by meeting a deadline. Daniel started calling once a week. Not for money. Not for advice. Just conversation. At first it was stiff. Surface level things. Work. Weather. The apartment upstairs neighbors who fought like it was a competitive sport. Then one evening he said something different. Marissa picked up a second job. That caught my attention. She did? I asked. Yeah. Part-time. Said we can't keep pretending things will just work out. There was no sarcasm in his voice. No bitterness. Just reality. I leaned back in my chair inside the cabin, watching the fire crackle low. "And how do you feel about that?" I asked. He was quiet for a few seconds. "Embarrassed," he said finally. "That it took this to wake me up." That word again. Wake. I didn't rub it in. Didn't say I told you so. That phrase never builds anything. Instead I said, embarrassment's temporary. Growth isn't. He exhaled slowly. "You were right about something else too." I waited. "I leaned on you because I knew you wouldn't let me fall." There it was. Not accusation. Recognition. "And now?" I asked. "Now I'm trying to build something I don't have to hide behind." That sentence stayed with me long after we hung up. A week later, Daniel and Marissa came to the cabin together. They brought groceries. Real groceries. Good cuts of meat. Fresh vegetables. A bottle of decent wine, not the flashy kind, but thoughtful. Marissa didn't stand stiff this time. She stepped onto the porch without hesitation. "Joe," she said. Not Dennis. Not Mr. Flores. Just Joe. We cooked together in the small cabin kitchen. It wasn't sentimental. It wasn't overly warm. But it wasn't cold either. Halfway through dinner, Marissa set her fork down. "I was wrong," she said plainly. "No theatrics. No tears. I thought your help meant you'd always bend." I confused generosity with obligation. That's a hard sentence to say. I looked at her for a long moment. "I don't mind helping," I said. "I mind being dismissed." She nodded. "I know that now." Daniel sat quietly between us, listening. For the first time in a long while, he didn't look pulled in two directions. He looked steady. After dinner, they helped wash dishes without being asked. Small thing. But I noticed small things. Before they left, Daniel handed me an envelope. Inside was an extra payment. "Bonus came in," he said. "Figured we'd move things along." I didn't comment on the amount. But I saw what it meant. They weren't scrambling anymore. They were stabilizing. When their car disappeared down the road, I didn't feel the old heaviness. No resentment. No guarded anger. Just something simple. Relief. "You see, kid. I didn't want them broken. I wanted them upright." There's a difference between revenge and recalibration. Revenge destroys. Recalibration corrects the angle so things don't collapse again. That text message months ago. It wasn't the end of us. It was the breaking point of an unhealthy balance. And sometimes, when something snaps, it's not the relationship that dies. It's the illusion. And once the illusion's gone, what's left has a chance to be real. Winter came early that year. First frost settled on the cabin roof like a warning. The trees went bare faster than usual. Air sharp enough to wake your bones. Daniel kept paying. Marissa kept working. We'd found a rhythm. Not the old one, where I carried and they leaned, but something steadier. Balanced. Then one Saturday morning, I heard tires again on the gravel. I expected Daniel. It wasn't him. It was Marissa. Alone. She stepped out slowly, hands tucked into her coat sleeves, no sunglasses this time. No defensive posture. Just, nervous. I didn't say anything at first. Just waited. She walked up the porch steps and stood there like someone about to confess something heavier than money. "Joe," she said softly. "Morning." She swallowed. Her breath visible in the cold. "I need to tell you something before Daniel does." That caught my attention. I leaned back against the porch railing. "All right." She took a long breath. "We almost lost the apartment last month." That surprised me. Payments had been steady. Why? She looked ashamed. Daniel got offered a new job. Better pay. But he would have had to relocate. I told him no. I studied her face. Why? Because he wanted to take it just to prove something to you. That hit somewhere deep. He thought if he made more money fast, you'd respect him again. I was quiet. She continued. I told him that wasn't the point. That you weren't testing his income. You were testing his backbone. I couldn't help it, I let out a small breath that almost resembled a laugh. And? He turned it down, she said. Stayed where he is. Asked for more responsibility instead. There was something different in her eyes now. Not calculation. Recognition. I was wrong about you, she said. You didn't want control. You wanted stability. I kept pushing him to prove independence by rejecting you. I didn't realize I was pushing him into weakness instead. That's not an easy realization to reach. Especially for someone who likes being right. I looked out at the trees for a moment. You were protecting your marriage, I said finally. Yes, she admitted. But I confused protection with isolation. We stood in a cold silence together. Then she said something I didn't expect. He talks about you differently now. How? Like a man he wants to resemble. Not escape. That one landed heavy. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just solid. I nodded slowly. Growth's uncomfortable, I said. For everyone involved. She hesitated before adding, we're expecting. I looked back at her. Expecting what? A baby. The word hung in the winter air like smoke. For a second, I didn't breathe. A grandchild. The cycle continuing. She smiled faintly, nervous, but sincere. We didn't want to tell you until we were stable. But I thought you should know. I felt something shift inside my chest. Not pride. Not fear. Responsibility. All over again. You're ready? I asked quietly. She nodded. More than we were. I believed her. Not because life would be easy. But because they'd tasted difficulty and survived it. That matters. Before she left, she turned on the porch. I'm glad you didn't bend, she said. If you had, we wouldn't have changed. I watched her car disappear down the gravel path. Snow started falling lightly after that. Soft. Quiet. I went inside and sat by the fire. A child coming into the world. Daniel standing on his own feet. Marissa seeing the difference between pride and partnership. All because of one text message that could have shattered everything. Instead, it corrected everything. Here's something you learn when you've lived long enough, kid. Sometimes being the villain in someone's short-term story is the only way to become the anchor in their long-term one. And if you stand firm without cruelty, you don't lose your family. You reshape it. The first time I heard the heartbeat, it didn't sound real. Fast. Small. Steady. Like someone tapping on a door from the other side. We were all standing in that dim ultrasound room, Daniel, pale and quiet, Marissa, gripping his hand, and me, sitting in the corner like I didn't want to intrude on something sacred. I hadn't planned on being there. Daniel asked. Dad, would you come? Just that. No pride. No hesitation. So I went. The technician smiled at the screen. Strong heartbeat. Daniel's eyes filled before he realized they were going to. He tried to hide it. Didn't work. Marissa looked at him, not impatient, not critical. Soft. When they printed the image, Daniel handed it to me. You keep the first copy, he said. I took it carefully, like paper could bruise. Later, at the diner down the road, over coffee that tasted burnt but honest, Daniel cleared his throat. "We've been thinking about names." I stirred my cup slowly. "Dangerous territory," I said. Marissa gave a small smile. "If it's a boy," she said carefully, "we want to name him Joseph." I didn't react right away. Didn't gasp. Didn't tear up. Just sat there. "After you," Daniel added. The diner felt quieter than it was. "That's not necessary," I said finally. "It is," Daniel replied. He didn't look embarrassed saying it. He looked certain. "You stood firm when we needed it." I didn't understand that before. I do now. Marissa nodded. "You didn't humiliate us," she said. "You didn't gloat. You just stopped rescuing. That changed everything." I looked down at the ultrasound picture in my hands. Life repeating itself. Not perfectly. But better. "Joseph's a strong name," I said quietly. Daniel smiled. It wasn't the grin of a boy getting approval. It was the steady expression of a man standing on his own legs. Winter deepened after that. Payments continued. They saved. They moved into a slightly better apartment, still modest, but theirs. Daniel stopped talking about quick wins and started talking about long-term. That's when I knew the shift was permanent. One evening, sitting by my cabin fire, I thought back to that text message. "Get out, old man." It had felt like rejection. But it turned out to be a hinge. A hard turn in the road that forced all of us to see ourselves clearly. If I'd reacted with anger, we'd have broken. If I'd reacted with weakness, we'd have rotted. Instead, I reacted with structure. And structure, kid, that's love wearing a backbone. When spring finally came and the snow melted off the trees, Daniel stood beside me on the porch again. Different posture. Different eyes. He wasn't leaning anymore. He was standing next to me. That's all a father really wants in the end. Not obedience. Not dependence. Just a grown child who can stand shoulder to shoulder without needing to step on you to feel tall. Remember this. Sometimes the hardest thing you can do for someone you love is let them feel the ground without you holding it up. And if they're willing to learn, they won't resent you for it. They'll thank you. Hospitals have a smell. Sterile. Clean. And heavy with things people don't say out loud. I was sitting in one of those molded plastic chairs outside the delivery room at 2:13 in the morning, hands folded, staring at a vending machine like it held answers. Daniel was pacing. He'd worn a path into the tile floor by the time the nurse came out and said, "It's time." He looked at me for a split second before going in. Not for permission. For steadiness. I gave him a nod. That was all he needed. An hour later, I heard it. That cry. Sharp. New. Angry at the world for being cold and bright. Joseph. When they finally let me in, Daniel was sitting beside the bed, hair a mess, eyes swollen from crying he didn't even try to hide anymore. Marissa looked exhausted. Pale. But proud. And in Daniel's arms, was the smallest human I'd ever seen. He stood when I stepped closer. "Dad," he said quietly, voice cracked. "Meet Joseph." He handed him to me. Carefully. Like something sacred. The baby's eyes were squeezed shut, fists clenched, face red with protest. I held him close. He was warm. Real. Breathing. Life doesn't ask permission before it begins. It just arrives. And in that moment, standing there with my grandson in my arms, I realized something simple. The house. The eviction. The text message. The anger. All of it had been scaffolding. Not destruction. Construction. Daniel watched me closely. You were right, he said softly. About what? I asked. That comfort isn't guaranteed. That responsibility matters. He looked down at his son. I don't want him growing up thinking someone else will always fix things for him. That's when I knew the lesson had rooted. Not because he repeated my words. Because he applied them. Marissa reached for Daniel's hand. We're going to do this right, she said. Not perfectly. Just right. I leaned down slightly and looked at Joseph's tiny face. You're going to fall someday, I murmured quietly, more to myself than anyone else. And that's all right. Daniel smiled faintly. On the drive back to the cabin later that morning, the sky was turning pink with sunrise. I didn't feel like a man who'd won something. I felt like a man who'd finally stepped into his proper place. Not the rescuer. Not the wallet. Not the villain. The elder. The foundation. And foundations aren't meant to be seen every day. They're meant to hold steady so the structure above can grow. That text message months ago. It felt like disrespect. But it forced clarity. And clarity forced change. Here's what I've learned, kid. If you always shield the next generation from hardship, you rob them of strength. But if you let them struggle without abandoning them, you give them something far more valuable than money. You give them weight. And weight, carried long enough, turns into backbone. You'd think the story ends with a birth. Crying baby. Soft apologies. Full circle. Life's not that tidy. Joseph was 6 months old the first time they brought him to the cabin. It was late summer. Warm air. The trees thick and green again. Daniel carried him in like he was presenting something to the world. Marissa followed with a diaper bag big enough to survive a week in the wilderness. Joseph's eyes were wide now. Curious. Alert. Taking in everything like he intended to own it someday. Daniel set him in my arms without hesitation. No tension. No pride battle. Just trust. That was the real change. We sat on the porch, 3 adults who had weathered something hard and come out steadier. Joseph grabbed at my shirt collar with surprising strength. Strong grip, I said. Stubborn too, Daniel replied. We shared a look. Some traits skip generations. At one point, Daniel leaned back in his chair and said something I didn't expect. I almost resent that text sometimes. I raised an eyebrow. Why? Because it forced me to grow up faster than I wanted. I nodded slowly. That's usually how growth works. He gave a quiet laugh. But I'm grateful for it. That mattered more than the apology ever did. Marissa added softly, we were living above our maturity. That was well said. Joseph started fussing, and Daniel stood instinctively, rocking him gently. No panic. No irritation. Just presence. Watching him, I realized something. He wasn't reacting to his son. He was responding. That difference is everything. As the sun dipped lower and painted the trees gold, Daniel turned to me. You ever regret it? He asked. What? Not backing down. Making us leave. I thought about it honestly. No, I said. But I regret not teaching you sooner. He considered that. Maybe you couldn't, he said. Maybe I wouldn't have heard it. That was probably true. Some lessons only land when comfort disappears. When they left that evening, Daniel paused by the car. He didn't rush off. He didn't look stressed. He looked steady. Love you, Dad, he said. Not forced. Not obligated. Just true. Love you too, I answered. Simple words. Hard-earned. After their car disappeared down the gravel road, I stayed on the porch a long time. The forest was quiet. Wind soft. Life settled. That text message months ago, the one that started everything, could have broken us. Instead, it exposed what needed fixing. Here's what I've learned, kid. You can't demand respect. You can't beg for it. You can only live in a way that requires it. And when someone tells you to get out of their life, sometimes the strongest thing you can do is leave completely, until they understand what your presence actually meant. Not every act of firmness is cruelty. Sometimes it's the cleanest form of love. And if you do it right, you don't lose your family. You help them grow into something worth standing beside.